watch it later. But in any event, we are recording it, so if you don't want your face shown in the recording, please be sure to mute your camera or disable your camera, rather. In any event, I'm delighted, actually, once a second time, you were here last year too, to welcome Demetria McCain, who is a Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity for HUD, I think the federal agency with the shortest acronym and the longest titles of almost any I know. But it is always a pleasure to have you here. Just very quickly, in terms of introduction, Secretary McCain is somebody who really came. Sometimes people see these speakers and think they sort of sprung magically from out of the out of the government or something like that, with no background. And this is somebody who has, if I can do a real quick version of this, I believe he's undergraduate from NYU, master's at Brooklyn College, doctorate from Howard University. This is somebody who I believe most recently with the Inclusive Communities Project in the Dallas area, who, as a matter of fact, I believe put together and started a rather a program called Voices for Opportunity, which was really advocacy training for voucher holders, the 2015 Texas Houser Award recipient, a whole series of other things, worked, I believe, at National Law Project in Oakland, California at one point, teaches fair housing and homelessness at Coppin State University in Baltimore, and that's in her spare time. And also, again, she's running around from place to place today because this is Fair Housing Month. And 2 days ago was the actual 55th anniversary of the signing of the Fair Housing Act. So it's a real honor, real pleasure to recognize you and to have you with us again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, it seems like you've had 2 days already of very intriguing and engaging issues. Let's just call Fair Housing Month something that we do 365 days of the year. Let's just all agree to do that. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm sending greetings from Secretary Marsha L. Fudge, who leads our work at HUD. The website for your conference includes a quote. And that quote says, "All of us do not have equal talent, but all of us should have an equal opportunity to develop our talent." And that quote by President John F. Kennedy actually resonates with me as head of the office at HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. Because you see, FHO is what we call ourselves for short. So indeed, lots of long names. But at FHO, our mission is to eliminate housing discrimination, promote equal opportunity, and achieve diverse, inclusive communities. Now, since we're in a virtual space, I'm going to take you somewhere virtually. So virtually walk with me. In one of our fine states of America, a man was denied housing by an owner and a property manager simply because he was the father to young children. In another one of our fine states, a Black woman was denied the opportunity to rent a unit from a landlord. The landlord made discriminatory statements to her. And that same landlord then placed discriminatory ads on Craigslist and retaliated against her once she filed a complaint. In another one of our very fine states of America, at a public housing agency, a significant portion of people with disabilities made reasonable accommodation requests that actually went ignored due to the Housing Authority's failure to provide proper monitoring and oversight of its subrecipient partners. And lastly, in another one of our fine states here in America, a woman was discriminated against based on sex and in particular, gender identity. When the manager and owner of an RV resort prohibited her from expressing her gender, she was then sent a letter by the owner telling her to act like a man, talk like a man, dress like a man to avoid trouble. These are the types of complaints that are just made far too often. They're based on the Fair Housing Act 7 protected classes. And so let's go through those real quickly. You may have heard of them the other 2 days, but I always say it's worth going through again. Race, national origin, color, religion, sex, including gender identity and sexual orientation, disability, and familial status. Familial status, fancy word for their children under the age of 18 in the home or about to be under the home, or somebody's pregnant or somebody's about to adopt or foster. And as we think about housing discrimination and the Fair Housing Act 7 protected classes, we must consider intersectionality. Because look, bad actors, they often discriminate based on a protected class, but quite often they discriminate based on more than one protected class. They don't always stop at a single bad act. Now, those were just 4 examples of the wide variety of cases that FHEO handles. And we're vigorously trying to enforce the Fair Housing Act and other civil rights laws to combat discrimination in housing. We do this not only through the Fair Housing Act, we have other authorities as well, right? And so some of our other authorities include Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So to the extent there's intersectionality based on protected class, sometimes other statutes and civil rights come into play when we see that there's discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. And so the work of our staff, who are located in 10 regions throughout the country, that work has actually garnered resolutions that not only assist the person complaining, but resolutions have included public interest relief as well, which means there are more people besides just the complainant who actually have been assisted by some of the relief that our office has received. Let me just give you an example of how many cases. Back in 2021, in fiscal year 2021, we received over 11,000 complaints. Over 11,000 complaints were filed. Now, disability continues to be the top basis of alleged discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. And second to that for disability, that's about 4,700, a little over 4,700 cases in fiscal 21. Race follows, being around 2,400 in fiscal 21, and then the other protected classes follow. In addition, we also see complaints that come in that are based on retaliation. Like I mentioned in the example before, retaliation after someone has tried to affect their fair housing rights. So listen, we receive a lot of complaints, but I can't say enough how grateful we are for our fair housing assistance programs. Those are programs that are in cities and states where they have laws that are substantially similar to the Federal Fair Housing Act, and they also are able to take some of the complaints that we refer to them. Now, while we address individual fair housing complaints, there is another part of the Fair Housing Act, which I heard a little birdie told me you guys have talked about during this conference. There's another part of the Fair Housing Act that too often goes ignored, and that is the affirmatively furthering fair housing mandate, which is part of the 1968 statute and has remained law ever since, okay? So that requires, and if you hadn't plugged into those other workshops you guys had earlier, it requires HUD programs and the activities administered in a way that affirmatively furthers the policies of the Fair Housing Act, right? And so AFFH for short, let's get into some acronym soup here. AFFH for short requires more than simply avoiding discrimination, folks, all right? And so on February 9th of this year, HUD published in the Federal Register a notice of proposed rulemaking entitled Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. And so the proposed rule, once finalized, would implement the Fair Housing Act's longtime statutory mandate to affirmatively further fair housing, which requires both the agency, that's us, HUD, and its program participants to proactively take meaningful actions to overcome the patterns of segregation, to promote fair housing choice, and to eliminate disparities and opportunities and foster inclusive communities that are free from discrimination. Now, the proposed rule actually builds upon the planning framework that was established by the 2015 AFFH rule, but we've made some notable refinements. And I won't go into the details of those, but you're welcome to go to HUD.gov/AFFH to read more about that. On that website, we've posted a recorded briefing about the proposed rule. That's going to be a comprehensive briefing that really kind of covers the main components of the proposed rule. And it also presents some supplementary information that focuses on planning by community development organizations or participants and by public housing agencies. And as well as the third component, that being the community members. So the proposed rule contains specific questions, and we want to hear from all you guys. It contains specific questions for public comment that's going to help us inform the final rule when we get to that step. Some of those things include the content of the proposed rule's equity plan, data, community engagement, support for different types of analysis, technical assistance, and a focus on fair housing goals. And so we welcome answers to all of the questions that we have in the proposed rule. And just so you know, folks, the deadline to get those comments in is April 24th. If you don't know how to submit a comment, public comment, that website I just mentioned, it actually gives you some tips on how to comment. You don't have to be a law professor to comment. You don't have to be the folks who are sponsoring this conference to comment. We want to hear from absolutely everybody so that we can make a strong rule, right? And so in addition to that, and as HUD is doing its part to carry out its own AFFH duties, in part, we're issuing rules and guidance. So hot off the presses, just a couple of weeks ago, was publication in the Federal Register of our discriminatory effects rule, right? Not enough can be said about our Office of General Counsel, who's really kind of worked hard on this for a good period of time. But as the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in the sale, rental, or the financing of dwellings and in other housing-related activities, the prohibition extends to practices with an unjustified discriminatory effect, regardless of whether there was an intent to discriminate. And so by way of background, in 2023, HUD published a rule which formalized a burden shifting test for determining whether a given practice has an unjustified discriminatory effect. In 2020, HUD also published a rule that would have actually altered the standards that were set forth in that 2013 version. However, there was a preliminary injunction that prevented that 2020 version from going into effect. And so with the Biden-Harris administration, when they came in, that was back in June 2021, HUD actually proposed a rule to recodify that 2013 version, right? So after consideration of the public comments that came in on that rule, the discriminatory effects rule, HUD and its final rule actually reinstates and maintains the 2013 version while rescinding that 2020 version, okay? And really, this version that we're talking about, 2013, as well as this current version, because they're the same, really, is aligned with the way courts have interpreted the Fair Housing Act and aligned with how the agency has interpreted the Fair Housing Act for many, many decades. And so that's why that was so very important. And while we certainly do handle a growing number of complaints that I mentioned earlier that are rooted in the Fair Housing Act and some of our other authorities, let me just say that it remains imperative that we continue to educate the public about fair housing rights and responsibilities, okay? And we're especially focused on making sure young adults who are just now entering the fair housing market, making sure that they're aware, making sure that housing providers are aware, right? Making sure that people with limited English proficiency are aware. This education outreach is so important. And while some may know when discrimination has happened to them, they may know it. We want to make sure that they know that there is an agency to which they can turn to try to address that discrimination, right? That we're out here and we're available. So this support of this is so important because, as I said, our mission at FHEO is to eliminate housing discrimination, right? Promote that equal opportunity and to achieve those diverse, inclusive communities. And now, while I've been talking about the work of FHEO, there is actually work that all of HUD is doing on a number of fronts. And I'll focus on one, and that is responding to Secretary Fudge's memo. She issued it back in February 2021, and that memo was entitled, Eliminating Barriers That May Unnecessarily Prevent Individuals with Criminal Histories from Participating in HUD Programs. So all programs at HUD are taking a look at its rules and regulations and examining, to the extent allowed by law, what can be amended to citizens who are returning home, re-entering society, and attempting to lead productive lives. It's been shown that this actually could address recidivism. When somebody has a roof over their head and a home to call their own, that could address recidivism rates. And so to aid our FHO staff, our FIP, our Private Enforcement Initiative grantees, as well as our state and local fair housing assistance programs, I issued a memorandum to our staff as well as FIPS and FAPS, and that was called Implementation of the Office of General Counsel's Guidance on Application of Fair Housing Act Standards to the use of criminal records by providers of housing and real estate transactions. Now, this guidance states that using criminal history to screen, deny, lease renewals, evict, or really otherwise exclude individuals from housing may be illegal under the Fair Housing Act under 3 different theories of liability: discriminatory intent, also known as disparate treatment, discriminatory effects, which I just mentioned, and the refusal to make reasonable accommodations. So that's something that we've been working on. Like I said, addressing these types of barriers is a HUD-wide activity that's taking place right now. Let me just mention, if folks haven't heard me mention it before, a little bit about special purpose credit programs. Special purpose credit programs. So when we're considering empowering people who are transitioning out of poverty, we really would be wise to consider the next stabilizing level of empowering them, which is helping them to build wealth, okay? So home ownership is really the primary way American families build wealth and are able to pass it on to the next generation. But I'll be honest with you, the gap between the racial and national origin gap on wealth building and home ownership is greater today than it was in 1968 when the Fair Housing Act was passed. And so in keeping with some of the work that the folks did who were able to amend ECOA, the Equal Credit and Opportunity Act, back in 1976, those folks on the Hill who created that statute actually created something called special purpose credit programs, meaning, hey, financial institutions, you can create these specialized programs to address people who have long been kept out of the credit market, right, based on systemic discrimination. But those lending institutions and financial institutions really hadn't gone the distance and created these programs at any large scale at all because they said they were afraid of the Fair Housing Act. And so under the Biden-Harris administration, our Office of General Counsel issued guidance on this issue. And that guidance said that when done in conjunction with ECOA, the act that I just mentioned, and Regulation B, that actually issuing these types of special credit programs that would actually assist people who have traditionally been kept out of the credit market to buy homes, those do not violate the Fair Housing Act. And so that work has actually seen a benefit already. There are certain special purpose credit programs coming on board. One example is Fannie Mae has one. And so we're hoping, and Secretary Fudge and folks from other sister agencies are really trying to push this and try to coax financial institutions to create these type of programs, which, along with other measures and other tools, would help close that gap, we believe, that home ownership and wealth gap that we know of. So that's something else that we're doing that's a little beyond what folks are used to hearing about. And so let me just say that for far too long, discrimination has kept people from stable, healthy, affordable homes on the basis of one or more of the protected characteristics, okay? We all know that home is where people have ability to actually build a life of opportunity, to recover from illness, to search for a job, to raise a family. And if we don't deal with our country's housing discrimination, will we ever be able to be a country where we might not have equal talent? We might not have equal talent, but will we be a country could have equal opportunity to develop that talent, the way the quote on your website says? I suggest if we don't deal with housing discrimination, we will not ever see a country where people have the equal opportunity to develop their talent. And so we've got to do this together, folks. It can't just be the federal government. It's got to be all of you out there, housing providers, advocates, stakeholders, community members, all of us, academics. We all have got to get into the game of fair housing. So I thank you for inviting me again. I appreciate it. And here's to day 3 of your conference. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much. I do have just one quickie question here for you too. Could you repeat? Someone said, could you put the link in the chat? I think that was about the comment period on AFFH.
Happy to do so. Absolutely. We'll do so.
Okay. And again, I know there's like a ton of questions for you. And I also know you've got another group waiting for you literally as soon as we're finished here. But at some point, I really would like to get a time for you. We could all get together and really talk more about what HUD is doing, and also give a chance to get some feedback from some of the stuff that's happening on the ground too. And that would be a great deal of fun to do. But maybe next year, hopefully, we'll see you at the 2024 Fair Housing and Civil Rights Conference.
Keep up the good work. Keep up the good work. I'll put that in the chat for you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Okay. And let me get on here for a moment. Going to spotlight myself for a moment, just to really go over some of the other comments, thoughts, and so forth. We have 3 more workshops. First of all, this afternoon, I want you to please keep that in mind. They're going to be starting actually at 2 o'clock and running from 2 until 3:30. And they are 10 top tips guide for undocumented immigrants post-arrival. Again, fair housing, more than just words, with Dan Weaver and Kristen Berry from HUD, really going to talk about some of the things that HUD is now doing, which is more than it's ever done before. And of course, our usual, if you will, end of day panel, the future of civil rights, which is sort of a regular here. And it will be hosted by Bob Terrell, who is one of the people who also has been on the planning committee with me as well. I just want to take a second of your time too to really, before we sort of look at some comments and questions and so forth, to do some thanks here, because there's a planning committee that puts this conference together every year. As I said before, I'm with something called Wayfinders. We are, again, a regional nonprofit in Western Massachusetts. We, in fact, have had a HUD FIP grant for a great many years to do education and outreach. So I suppose it falls under this, but we've really gotten a whole series of partners to work as well on this. Again, Ken On from the EEOC, Rhonda Albin-Smith from Department of Labor, Teresa Dudek-Tess, who started with us, as a matter of fact, as sort of just a law student helping us out, and has become one of the committee that helps pull this together every year. Harris Freeman from Western New England University School of Law, Mark Latanzi from Wayfinders, Glenn Morales-Carbo from Wayfinders, Megan Peak from Wayfinders, Mike Rojas from the EEOC, Jody Smith from Wayfinders, Maureen St. Cyr from the Massachusetts Fair Housing Center. Again, this is an agency which had been a partner of ours from the beginning, really, with this conference, with Jamie Williamson, who's now at the EEOC, but at the time was the executive director of the Massachusetts Fair Housing Center. They say Robert Terrell from the Boston Fair Housing Commission, and Rosa Tobin from the Massachusetts Fair Housing Center. And I think some particular thanks really should go out to Corinne Carpengendran and Jennifer Kahn, particularly from Wayfinders, my agency, and just the whole slew of volunteers. Donna, who certainly has been one of our key translators, Kelly, Elish, Eric, and just so many other people, almost too many to mention, that really makes this conference happen every year, and really don't get mentions until at least the very end. So it's not quite the very end. I wanted to at least make sure that some thanks were due there. And also thanks to everybody who comes to do these conferences, presentations. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and hopefully they're useful. We like to hear from you, and we also like to hear from anybody who might be interested in doing a presentation at next year's conference, which will be again in April of 2024. Also, if you look at our website, which is www.fhcrconference.com. That's www.fhcrconference.com. A number of things. If you go under resources, you will find recordings of past presentations from past years, and in about 2 weeks, you will be seeing many of the workshops that we had today will be available for you to look at them again. Yeah, also some of the slides will be available, and this is again is a case-by-case basis, but hopefully you'll find what you need to have on it. I think that's pretty much the odds and ends, but I wanted to make sure that everybody really understood this. Because of COVID, the last 3 years we've been doing this conference as only virtually, and we've gained something by that. I think it's become really a national conference. We draw from 24 to 26 states in any given conference, 2 or 3 foreign countries, and so that's been very good for us. But we've also, in some ways, lost the ability to have people sit down together at lunchtime who normally don't get a chance to talk to each other, to really share what their experiences are and really understand that we are all in this together. So hopefully next year, we're going to work on trying to figure out how are we going to be able to do this? How are we going to be able to have both the in-person experience and at the same time continue to provide this as a national, perhaps even international virtual conference. So that's just a little bit of the background. If anyone has any, if you look in the chat there, I believe we have the links for from HUD. And again, this is something where we are all of us who provide services. This is unfortunately the law. People's rights are real. Unfortunately, sometimes we fall short in implementation. That's one of the reasons why this AFFH revision, I think, is something that's going to be very important. We'll talk about it some more next year. It's not simply sufficient not to push somebody into the water and drown them, but if somebody is drowning, you also need to be ready to help pull them out and listen to what their problems are. So I think this is going to be one of the exciting things that we're going to be working with over the coming year. Again, I just looking at any other comments here in the chat or anything like that. Otherwise, I just really like to thank everybody. My best wishes to anybody. If anyone Any of the other members of the committee have anything they want to add? I throw that in. Time to speak up. Okay. All right. So you get early for your luncheon plenary ended a little bit early today and gives you more time for lunch to catch your breath. Again, we'll see you at 2 o'clock for our last round of workshops for this year's conference. Again, thank you to everyone who made the conference possible. Thank you to all of you for being here. And please spread the word. Many of these workshops will be available on the website in about 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.